Good morning, everyone. First of all, it's a privilege to be here and see so many interested faces in the topic that the panel and I are here to discuss. What does it take to become a global leader? In my 30 years, there are many ways and there are many paths. But in my 30 years, I've seen it summarized so succinctly under two buckets, and that's character and competence. And you almost have to have both, because what good is character without competency as a leader or as an executive? And what good is competency without character? Because integrity is paramount. And then there's also a third C that I always like to do things in threes. The third C is choices. And sometimes we make life choices to get to where we are. And sometimes these choices come easily and clearly, and sometimes not. So with that, let's take a closer look at what that means to have the competence and the character in becoming a global leader. I had no idea until last night's dinner that I had such a distinguished panel in terms of the champions they are and the change agents they are and the role models they are from the companies that they come from. So without further ado, I'd love to invite you to welcome Mahendra Nair, who is General Manager of Long-Term Contracts with GE, Nancy Pak, who is General Manager of Tom's, which is a Colgate-Palmolive company, and Philip Han, who is Managing Director of Global Head of Quantitative Prime Services. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Please give them a welcome. You know, we've had really good sessions getting to know each other through the course of preparing for this, and all of them have great personal and professional journeys. And I thought it was really relevant for them to kick off with sharing a little bit of their stories, the personal journeys and professional journeys they've had that got them here, and the pivotal moments in their career, what changed, what risks and what challenges. All right, I'm going to have a volunteer. We didn't rehearse this part. Mahendra, do you want to lead us?
I can get started, right?
Thank you.
So I'll touch upon my background very quickly. Born and brought up in India, studied right through there. My basic graduation is in chemistry. Then I did my master's in MBA in sales and marketing. Started working for consumer goods companies, and then moved over to GE, made that first pivotal shift. But before I go on to my work experience, she talked about the risks that we take, right? I have three major risks, and I'll touch upon the first one. If you're in India and you grew up in the 70s and 80s, you're a failure if you're not a doctor or an engineer, right? And I studied to be a doctor. And I decided to shift from there and switch over to an MBA in sales and marketing, which was an upcoming stream at that point in time. So my parents labeled me a failure just for doing that, and that was a personal risk at that point in time. The second risk was when I switched from consumer goods to GE. And back in the 90s, GE was not well known in India. It is well known all over the world, but not so much in India. And we had just started the JECIS practice out there. For a consumer goods major, going into an industrial company, not knowing all the background was another big risk. That was a professional risk. And then having been in India for a few years with GE, moved over to the US, working for GE Aviation. Now, my background is in consumer, sales and marketing, did business development, and now I'm going to an industrial company steeped in export control technology. We moved with family, a very young family, over to the US 12 years ago, lock, stock, and barrel, with no relationship or nobody out here in the US to support us. So that was a third big pivot and big risk. Knowing very well our bags were packed because we could get kicked out of GE in the US at any given point in time. I appreciate what Anne talked about in terms of it's the competency, the character, and the choices. And I want to hit on the choices part. Instead of blaming others for the choices you make, you own up to the responsibility of the choices. This is what I'm trying to teach my 13-year-old son. I made the choice to shift from consumer goods and doing from being a doctor to consumer goods, and then from consumer goods to industrial, and then moving from India to the US. If I had a failure at any point in time, I own it up to myself. I don't blame my parents, I don't blame the society, I don't blame the company. And that's what I'm trying to teach my own 13-year-old son.
Yeah, thank you. Nancy?
Sure. So good morning. Nancy Pak. Currently, I'm the general manager of Tom's of Maine, which is, as Anne said, is a business unit of Colgate-Palmolive, and we're based in Kennebunk, Maine, the northeast. So I've been part of the Colgate-Palmolive network for 20 years, and I'll talk a little bit about the journey that has taken me there. But let me go back to a couple of personal moments. Similar to what Mahendra mentioned, so I'm an American, Asian American. I'm of Korean background, born in the US, and pretty much the quintessential New Yorker, having lived here most of my life. And my father was, from the northern part of Korea before it was North Korea, and he was an extremely ambitious person. He was a chemical engineer for DuPont, and then he transitioned to become a businessman. He owned his own business right here in New York City in imported goods. His ambition was very, very clear, and it was passed on to me in several powerful ways. I'm the firstborn of two girls, and he, from early on, and I think Mahendra touched on it, he really wanted me to be a lawyer, a doctor, or a classic pianist. Those were the only three career choices that you can pick from. So, it may sound stereotypical, but, the absolute focus and drive for you to be the best you can be in math and science. He was less interested in the arts. He was less interested if I could speak another language, but it was all about math and science. So I had that, absolute focus and drive. As I, transitioned, and then after university, and then after going to graduate school, I made the choice to go into marketing, so into consumer goods, and he was quite surprised. He said, "Okay, you're not being a doctor or a lawyer or a classic pianist." And I said, "Don't worry, I think I can be successful in any case." Went down that path. And I guess a couple things there is, as I first joined Colgate, I'll talk a little bit about, building your brand, which is a combination of competency and character. Those early years, it's all about doing, the job, whatever's given to you. So whether you're asked to analyze something or you're supporting, a broader group, a broader team of marketing people, you're doing your best as an individual. And you're really, those first early years is about competence and, really excelling in whatever role you're in. As you progress from there, what I found is it's not just enough to be competent at your job. It was very important to start building your own brand equity, if I use marketing terms, and you have to start, proactively looking for career opportunities, proactively looking for mentors, proactively, building your brand and saying, what is my value and what is the presence and the standpoint that I want to build. So these are some of the important traits that, from my upbringing all the way through to start shifting from those early years of competence to now building brand and character. I think if I can touch on two pivotal moments, and the continued journey here is my husband and I, we married late in life, but we were married, and as we were, starting to head down that path of, deciding we were going to get married, I started to talk about professional and personal choice. And I discussed with him, I'm in a global leading consumer products company, and I will have the opportunity to go abroad if I so choose, and I really want to do this. He was a teacher for many years, and he said, if you want to do that, I will go with you. We'll make the personal journey together. And so that was the first choice and very pivotal moment, because that opened a world of opportunities. I was able to discuss that with, folks who are part of the career planning process. I was able to demonstrate and, put my hand up and say, I want to go abroad. I want to have that international experience. I want to be a global leader. So that was a big choice that we made together. And we went abroad. I left the United States. We went to Bangkok, a place that, this is a reverse of your story. I think I'd been to Asia, once, to Korea as a child, but I was moving to a completely different part of the world. We didn't know anybody in Bangkok, and we had two very, very little kids that we were taking with us. So that was a catalyst. It was a world of opportunity being open to me, but it was a little bit scary. We were certainly taking a risk, but it was a very powerful moment. And the second one I'll just touch on briefly is, so that was now I've gone abroad and I was taking an international marketing role. And that was significant. And then I moved to Warsaw, Poland to do marketing in Central Europe, based in Poland. But the big second pivotal moment is raising my hand again and saying, I don't want to be a marketing functional specialist. I actually want to get into general management. I want to run a business unit. And, even though I thought, wow, this is something that's really different, I hope I have the skill set. I hope I've built that equity with the company for them to trust me to do so. And they gave me the opportunity. And so moving into general management, which is managing all functions, finance, customer service, logistics, supply chain, commercial functions, things that I was not as close to, but I said, this is what I want to do. I want to challenge myself and take that opportunity. I'm going to ask for that opportunity proactively. So in doing that, and very fortunate that Colgate's given me that opportunity, I was able to step into that. And so back to the United States, living in Northeast, and having the opportunity to run a business unit, which, I'm here today because of those early years of my father's, just tenacious determination for me to be successful, not as a doctor or lawyer, but, as a proud business person.
Thank you, Nancy. And Philip, I'm sure you fulfilled your parents' desires.
Hopefully. Thanks, Anne. So Phil Hahn, I have been at Goldman for 8 years, and my path is a little bit different, but there's certainly some things there that I can relate a lot to. So I was born in Taiwan, of mixed race. My mother's American, my father's Taiwanese. They met actually doing business, and so I was born there, and I lived there till I was 9. I moved to Long Island, not too far from here, and lived there until I went to Emory undergrad. And then my career was really always through the financial services industry. So I started at Wells Fargo for the first 2 years in a leadership program through what they called at the time their services company, through operations, technology, finance, et cetera. And then I moved to Lehman Brothers in the summer of 2004. And as you're going to get a sense of my pivotal moment in a second, I moved to Goldman Sachs in September of 2008. And so I've been at Goldman for almost 8 years. And, as I think about what I want to touch on today and what was important was really two main themes in the context of my career progression. One is mentorship and sponsorship, which happens to be the theme of our Asian Professional Network at Goldman Sachs. It has been for the last 2 years. And what that's really about is, who is helping guide your path, and then who is sponsoring that path to enable that to actually happen. And we'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. And that's been a big part of how I've been able to do the things I've wanted to do at Goldman Sachs. And the second part is, I would say, around authenticity and being who you are and doing the things you do well and being self-aware about the things that you're not so good at. As I heard the stories that both Nancy and Mahendra shared, because I came from this mixed race household, and my father kind of had the tougher job because it was the 10 generations before him that were doctors, and he was an exporter. So by the time he let everybody down, I kind of had more flexibility. But I would say on the flexibility, because of the different industries and because of the mixed race, I think in some ways there was kind of a perspective of kind of doing different things that was interesting. And what I would just say on that is it took me a lot of different paths, but as I got down there, I felt the challenges were when I was trying to do something when I thought it was the right thing to do, as opposed to doing really the right thing because it really was the right thing for me, and being self-aware around that. And last thing I'll share is the pivotal moment, which I alluded to. And so, you look at my title, which is a mouthful, and you're like, oh, what could that possibly mean? The reality is my role is to work with systematic or quantitatively oriented hedge funds. Some of you may have heard of our D. Shaw, Renaissance, Two Sigma, et cetera, and building and developing those relationships for Goldman Sachs. The irony, of course, and why this ties to my pivotal moment, is that when you think of those firms, you think of a very technical, algorithmic, trading, latency, very technical engineering type of sale and process. And actually, in the reality of my pivotal moment, and for those of you who may have seen the movie The Big Short, there are 3 characters in the movie who actually travel to Florida: Mark, Vinny, Danny, and Porter, those 4. They called me in March of '08 and said, you've been covering us all these years, you've done a terrific job, and we're concerned and we want to help you. And they got me my interview at Goldman Sachs in March of '08. So I think about the quality and the power of relationships, even in the context of something that can be so technical. That will always be with me. So that's me.
Thank you, Philip. Well, you know, there are so many valuable lessons we could draw from your journey in the pivotal moments. All three of you have shared with me along the way how important the whole mentoring and sponsorship element is in your growth. Perhaps one of you or all of you, I think we have time, could share that moment of a lesson learned in mentoring or being mentored.
I can take a start here. So I'll tee off from where I left earlier. So coming into the US, brand new, started on the marketing side because that's where I could build some competency on. You touched upon competence as the first C. Essentially, you got to be very good at what you do. I think, Nancy, you touched upon it, Phil, you touched upon it too. You got to be very good at what you do when you're starting as an individual contributor. Once you get that, demonstrate your competence and character, you will get noticed by someone. In my case, I got noticed by the APA network, the Asia Pacific American Forum and GE, and I also got noticed by the HR folks. Mentoring is fairly common in the sense whether it's within your division, whether it's within the affinity network, you could get mentoring support. What's not so common is sponsorship. Sponsorship is not very formal. You get sponsored by virtue of how good you are in terms of your competence and character. I got tapped. I was very, very lucky to get tapped because of the work that I was able to do. And eventually, they laid out the business. That my sponsor laid out a couple of choices for me along the way. They were all risks because I didn't have the pedigree. I didn't have an aviation background. I didn't have the engineering degrees to be able to succeed. But that path was, I was given some choices that came with a risk. I took those risks, and eventually, things worked out very well. And here, I'm actually leading a $5 billion P&L right now, which if somebody asked me 10 years ago, what do you want to be 10 years from now, I would have never guessed where I'm here today. Impossible. So that's where the pivotal moment of the difference between mentoring and sponsorship. I'll just touch upon one more thing. Your responsibility as a sponsoree is to make sure that you set your expectations very, very clear to your sponsor. Your sponsor is going to stick your neck out for you once. And fight for the business, fight for you with the business. If you disappoint the sponsors in some way, either in terms of performance or in terms of not picking up the choices that were laid out to you, you're going to lose the sponsor. And probably you won't find another sponsor again. The problem lies in not very clearly articulating what your choices are, what your concerns are, what is it that keeps you kicking, sure, right, along the way.
Absolutely. Nancy, I'm not sure where you were going to take this one, but I know we spoke a lot about building your brand and how you package yourself. Would you share some of those thoughts with us from your journey?
Absolutely, and I'll link it to mentoring and some of what Mahendra said. So I'm very fortunate that Colgate-Palmolive has a litany of leadership programs for people at different levels. And in 2010, I was tapped to join one of their programs, which is called Global 2030, and it is tied to the Tuck School of Business. It's a one-year program, and you have to be on the program, be part of it, travel the world. At the same time, you have to do your job. So it was very, very interesting in terms of work, life, and family management at the time. And the benefit of that program is what I learned very clearly, and I encourage all of you to read this book if you haven't already read Marshall Goldsmith's What Got You Here Won't Get You There. It's the first thing that you're given as part of the program, and the whole program is around that theme. There are 12 people plus a leader of the program, and for 1 year you find out that everything that you knew, everything you thought you were, and everything you thought you could be, you just threw it out the window. You can be more than you actually assumed. You will be challenged in that program. And what we had is we actually had a buddy. So there were 12 of us, and we had a coaching partner. And this coaching partner, you were matched up with this person based a little bit on, the person's different than you. If you're in marketing, maybe the person is in finance, and so on and so forth. And for 1 year, you're staring at this person. It's like staring in the mirror daily. They give you feedback. There are coaching sessions, both formal and informal. then the program leader gave us a lot of guidance. And he, after, whether it be a presentation you made or a work session you had, he immediately gave you feedback. And while, that's a little bit more of a formal mentoring aspect of a formal leadership program, that coaching partner piece was almost equally powerful, or more powerful than that leader who was giving the feedback. And I keep in touch with this person. We're very, very close. I owe a lot of what I've learned from the program from him, and I have passed that on to people in my team. We have other leadership programs at more junior levels. I'm very aggressive to get as many people in that program into Colgate as possible, and I give them the same thing. I give them the book before they go on the program. I give them the advice that be open and realize that what got you here won't get you there in the future. Be willing to be open to feedback, and to really, part of building your brand is that feedback you're going to get. And the mentoring is not just if somebody puts you with someone else. You can seek those people out, whether it be your current manager, someone more senior, people on your team and peers. Seek those mentors out proactively and make sure that you're getting the feedback, you're asking for frank input, because that continues to build your brand. And I owe a lot of who I am today from that leadership journey. That 1 year was incredible, and all the lessons I learned there and the informal mentoring aspect of my professional life is, I'm going to carry that until I retire.
Thank you, Nancy. Philip?
I think, as I think about these 8 years at Goldman and what has, allowed me to pivot and see, what in reality are the challenging areas for me and be honest about them, was really through a program we have called VPLAI, which stands for Vice President Leadership Acceleration Initiative. And it's very similar to what Nancy described, a program of which we select high-performing vice presidents throughout the firm globally to attend in New York, although then we fall into groups and it's run globally. And one of the, I think, critical parts that came out of it for me, and when eyes kind of finally opened, was around two things. One is a program they call the Challenge Forum, which is really a program of which you're in a room with another 6 to 7 people in the program, led by a partner of the firm. And you get to talk about the things that you're always worried that you can't talk about. I'll just give you an example, something like, I want to run this business, but there's someone very capable ahead of me. Is that ever going to happen? Or something else. Very, very things that you would say, oh, can I say that? And it was really helpful to see how many people shared in the same challenges or facing the same things and having a dialogue around that. The second part was really a review from my peers that didn't have sort of kind of the pressure of the annual review of the game theory around it, and I've got to do well, and it's going to affect my comp and all this stuff. It was really an effort completely separate just to kind of help you singularly, and I don't think people felt they could be very honest because they didn't feel like it had some profound negative impact or positive impact, and just could say what they really felt. And there were two very key things that came out of this, and I would say, wherever you are, I would invite all of you to try to bring yourself to a place where you can have this type of self-awareness or see these things. And the two things for me, at least, and I'll share them, were, one, I was proud of my production and I was proud of the amount of business I was producing as an individual. And, the partner said to me in the challenge forum, he said, okay, that's great, that may get you promoted or what have you, but there isn't another step you can take until you get 5 people to do this at least 80% as well as you could do it. And that was extremely humbling. I said, oh, okay, all right, well, that's going to be different. That's going to be a challenge. And the second part that came out of the review was, and again, this was humbling, was having kind of appreciation of my ability or inability at that point to collaborate with some other individuals, and what were the steps I had to take to do those things. And so I think that as part, frankly, as co-chair of our Asian Professional Network, which I know Mahendra has a similar role, that has been an enormously rewarding leadership opportunity. And this panel is all about leadership. So I would say, having to face those things and be honest with those things, even if it's a little bit painful, is really good for the long term.
Thank you. Now, I think we're just about half time through the session, oops, I've got a card that says 10 minutes, so we have to rapid pace it. And I'm going to start speaking really fast then. But I think, thank you so much. I think that's a real wealth of knowledge. But one of the things that we promised you that we'll talk about is the gear shifting, from management into leadership. And I know you'll spend the rest of the day with the globality of it all and the complexity that comes into it. And in today's context, it's even more complicated. You've got volatility, you've got uncertainty, you've got complexity, and you've got ambiguity. So as we share the gear shifting, you load that up with what we call VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But I'd love to get the panel to talk about, there are key differences between being a manager and being a leader. The biggest difference, I think, is in the way you motivate people. So that comes into the character piece. And many people, by the way, are managers and leaders at the same time. But those who have management jobs have realized, most of you have realized this, that you cannot buy the hearts of the people to follow you down a difficult path. And you have to act as leaders. Now, what's that shift that you guys had to make? I always say managers have subordinates, leaders have followers. I also always think about it as, managers are work-focused and leaders are people-focused. So with that, without me stealing your thunder, I know you have a lot of thoughts around the gear shifting from managers to leaders. Any one of you can go first, and all of you can go at the same time. Talk about it.
That won't help.
All right, we'll switch it up. Maybe
we'll go this way.
Okay. So actually, Anne, I'm really glad you used the word follower, because the term we use internally is it's like being a manager is an assignment, but having followership is really being a leader. And in my role, in this global role within this Quantitative Prime Services business. For us, it's a growth business. We don't have the luxury of being number one or number two in this business and defending our market share and continue to build on the franchise. And so when you're in a growth business, which we've all been a part of, and probably many of you in the audience, there's more friction. It can be very extremely rewarding. There are challenges that are different than in a stable and kind of number one position. And I'd say, being authentic and having those who work for you in this capacity believe that you want them to succeed and there's a path for them, and giving them a platform is critical. Everyone's looking for a platform, and I would say that in a growth business is actually in some ways an easier place to do it. So assigning and allowing people to say, this is yours, I'm excited to see what you can make of it, and crediting them has enormous goodwill that's packaged with that. And I would say that comes with a lot of loyalty. It comes with people who want to continue to be involved and invested in the business. And it's been kind of the key part, I think, for us, because inevitably we all make mistakes and there are challenges, but I think if people feel like you're protecting them and investing in them in this way, you can get through most of that.
Yeah, and I love what you said about authenticity, because at the end of the day, I think the world is pretty tired with a lot of the do's, don'ts, musts, and should have, could have, the vulnerability and your willingness to become a real leader by showing who you are and being vulnerable, not having all the answers is pretty important, I think. And so Mahendra and Nancy, I invite you to share your thoughts on that.
All right, you want to switch it up?
Sure.
So, I look at it, most GE folks here will kind of agree with me, and maybe it happens in your companies too. I look at it as a 3-step journey. You start as an individual contributor, then you step up to be a manager, and then from manager you grow into being a leader. You don't step into being a leader, you grow into being a leader. And you talked about 3 C's, I'll talk about 3 A's as you go through this journey, right? It's how you adapt yourself. As an IC, you don't have to adapt, you're told what to do. As a manager, you adapt to circumstances, you're transactional. As a leader, you foresee what's coming down around the bend, and then you make your business, your teams adapt to it, or tell them what's coming down and what's the best way to do it. So the adaptability is the first A. Second A is the attitude. What attitude do you have when you're faced with a crisis? All of our businesses have gone through crisis. You touched upon volatility right now. Every business is a shifting reality almost every day. So how are you going to react to it? And basically I tell all my mentees is that you're going to have 182 bad days in a year. As long as you have 183 good days in a non-leap year, that's a good year for you, right? As long as you have the attitude, pardon my language, shit happens. Every business it has, personal, professional life, what's your attitude that you're going to face it on, head on, not escape it, and then be happy at the end of the day with what you've done? And the last one is authentic, and I'm glad, Phil, you touched upon it twice. So it's actually being open, being very transparent with your team, saying, look, crisis has hit me. I have no idea what to do with it. Let's work this together. But we're not going to back down. We're not going to sit here and be victims of the crisis. We're going to take it head on, and we're going to work it. And that's something that I'm sure your leaders have talked to you, our leaders talk to us. And the last point that I would leave you with, as leaders, the transition from managers to leaders is, you're hearing 4 stories up here. You each have a story that's equal or better than the stories that we have told, right? As a leader, it's our responsibility to tap into those stories of individuals, what makes them successful, what's got them successful to this point, and then launch them into the potential success that they can get to eventually in the future.
Thank you, Mahendra.
So similar to what Phil and Mahendra have said, I'll add a couple of points. I think that, as Mahendra mentioned, first you're starting out as an individual contributor, and then as you're doing well, you're given more responsibility, you have a bigger business, or you have a bigger team, and you're evolving. And I think that, many people evolve successfully, but I think the step change and really the most eye-opening and humbling experience for me has been moving from being a marketing specialist into this more general management role. And a couple of things come to mind that I'd like to share. One is listening is more important than ever before as you go from being a manager to a leader of a company, a leader of your people, a leader in the industry. And that is a skill that I think people take for granted. Oh, I listen, I'm listening to people, but are you truly demonstrating that listening? And you really have to learn to not give your point of view first. There are certain things when we talk about, marketing campaigns at Tom's of Maine. I've got 10 ideas and I'm dying to share them, and you have to listen to what everyone else in the room is saying, and then maybe you're adding one point or you're building on someone else, building on your team's ideas. And it's less about individual ideas and more about, listening, integrating, maybe adding something if necessary, and then letting it go and letting your team be successful. I think the humility has been, extremely important because as a marketing specialist, I'm not the expert in finance. I'm not an expert in supply chain. I'm not an expert with, going to retailers as much as maybe other people on the team. And so it's that, that sense of humility that, wow, I'm not the expert, and I'm never going to be the expert in all these functions, but that's okay because what I'm relying on is not my individual contribution and creativity. It's more about the team and really, making sure you leverage the very best people that are around you and taking that in and relying on them for business success. I think the last piece I'd like to share is, a leader looks way out into the future. So as an individual contributor, you have deadlines, you have projects to manage, you're managing teams to get things done. But as a leader, you have to look way beyond that. And I think my current role has really challenged my skill to do that. Tom's of Maine is a very successful company, leader in the naturals industry in oral care and personal care. And it's been growing double digit every year for 10 plus years out of the 46 years that it's been in business. And it's just been this growth momentum, and people expect that growth is going to come. But what I found was, the company had not been looking far enough into the future. So as I arrived to the role, I asked, was there a 5-year plan? What's the mission of the company? Where do we want to be as a brand and as a business and as an organization 10 years from now? And there was silence. There wasn't that 5 to 7 year, 10-year footprint. So, it's less about if I can be creative in a particular project or if I understand finance to the very last, element of driving the company financially. But it was more, I feel like my footprint on the company has been developing that 5-year plan, capabilities, resources, analytics, talent profile, and building people, the people around me, so that they can be successful and take the company forward to the next 5 and 7 years. And I brought people together this past January, the whole company. I shared the vision. I shared, how big the business can be in the next 10 years. I shared the financial picture that goes with that, and I told them that you are the team, you are the people that are going to make this company double and triple in size. But I think if you don't look forward, I think if you're very focused on the short term, you're going to miss that opportunity as a leader to make, really put a footprint in it and leave whatever role or company you're in better than you found it.
Thank you, Nancy. Spoken like true global leaders. Thank you. I think we're going to be short on time, and I'm sorry that this session doesn't allow for Q&A, but I've already touted all three of them for being around to answer any questions. But before I close, Philip, I don't want to miss this. We talked about Pine Street a little bit. Mm-hmm. Can you spend a minute on that? Because I think it's very important for a takeaway.
Sure. So Pine Street is, and thanks for that, Anne. Pine Street is actually the original street where Goldman Sachs was founded, almost 150 years ago. I think that's where we're almost there. So, it is now the program for our executive leadership and management training. So I was so glad you mentioned Marshall Goldsmith, because we've had him in to speak and on that book specifically. Incredible. And so it's for our managing director and partner population. And actually, as I shared earlier about relationships, it also allows us to bring in the executives at our client relationships to join us at these events. And I think the power of it is, and I've said this bluntly before, it's not just a bunch of senior Goldman folks telling you how great they are. In reality, it's Fortune 100 leadership coaches, it's management consultants, it's neuroscientists coming in and sharing what are some of those attributes of leadership that you should kind of be aware of and cognizant of. So it's a program we're really proud of. And again, it's a resource that I think without, the blind spots may be greater than kind of what we can appreciate. And I think I just want to touch on something Mahendra said, which I thought, or actually maybe it was Nancy, which is like this, it's the same thing, the future. And this future really is the difference between, in our words, would be separating the urgent from the important. Mm-hmm. We all have way too much urgent, and we have to really do a good job of getting ourselves above the urgent. Otherwise, it's going to be reactive. And I would say from a Goldman perspective, our industry is going through significant change. And so your ability to kind of see above that through the important, being strategic, being adaptable, that was another word that I heard that was shared by Mahendra. I mean, I think that's really critical for global leadership today. And so, I'd just say those from us is a big part of, I think, who we are.
Thank you. I think we're out of time, and I want to thank the panelists for their contributions. I do think a message that we all have, I can't help but receive it, and I hope you do too, is this is everybody's responsibility, wherever you are in the organization, particularly if you're a leader, but especially if you're aspiring to be a leader. So thank you very much. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
Nancy, Mahendra.
Thank you.